Could Diddy get bail? May sound like a long shot, but is there something that could maybe change the judge's mind? Well, we're going to be speaking with the bail bondsman to the stars, Ira Judelson, about whether Diddy may get out in a rumored new bail package. He has been working with Diddy's team. Plus, what can we expect about whether the rap mogul will spend the next decade or two behind bars?
Diddy's guilty verdict had just dropped, and the courtroom was still trembling. You could still hear the echo of the jury foreman's voice in the wood-paneled walls. Reporters were scrambling outside, storming the courthouse steps.
Whose verdict world is what's next, right? After being convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, now we ask, what is his sentence going to be on those 2 charges, the Mann Act charges? And there's also another question that we're going to address today. Could he get bail? Could he get out? You might be saying, Jesse, wait a second. He was denied bail at every turn. And you would be right, he was. Despite proposing extensive bail conditions during the course of this legal saga, including a $50 million bail package and monitoring by private security personnel, the court was not convinced. Now, by law, the defense has the burden to prove that Combs is not a flight risk or danger to the community. And given the charges, the allegations, including that he was improperly trying to contact people in the case pre-trial, he was always denied release. But then there's what happened after the verdict last week. And this is an interesting conversation. And again, we're going to be speaking with Ira Judelson in a minute, who's been working with Diddy's team on possibly getting him released. But after the verdict, the defense applied for Combs to be released from detention pending sentencing. But that request was again denied by Judge Arun Subramanian. The defense argued, look, he's no longer charged with RICO, there's no longer presumption of detention, we have his passport, there's no access to private planes, there's no criminal history, this is his first conviction, he would be a fool to mess any of this up because he was just given his life back by the jury, he wasn't convicted of the highest charges, he was facing up to life in prison, now he's not. He should be allowed to return to his property, his mansion in Florida. There'll be a $1 million bond. Now, the government argued, look, Sean Combs, he was convicted of serious charges, Mann Act violations. There was physical abuse in this case. There was prolific use and distribution of drugs. He committed crimes while under investigation, including having drugs in his hotel room when he planned to surrender to federal authorities back in September of 2024. And Judge Arun Subramanian denied the bail application, sided with the government, that these convictions on these charges, by law, they trigger the mandatory detention statute, that the defense conceded Combs is violent. They conceded that at trial, quote, we own the domestic violence. That's what the defense had said. The judge also made the point that it was impossible for the defense to demonstrate that he poses no danger, particularly given his violence after the searches of his properties and when he knew he was under investigation. That's the whole Violent Jane episode, attacking Jane, one of the victims in this case. And also that the evidence at trial showed there was a years-long pattern of abuse and violence. But despite the judge denying Combs' release once again, and given that his sentencing has officially been confirmed for October 3rd, that was agreed by both the defense and the prosecution yesterday, could he get out beforehand? It's an interesting question. Let me bring in right now a special guest. I am joined by one of the most renowned bail bondsmen, probably in the country, definitely in New York, Ira Judelson. Ira, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar, and pleasure to meet you.
You too, Jess. Pleasure myself.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do. Talk about what you do. I don't know if everybody completely understands the process and your role in it.
You know, it's funny. Not a lot of people understand the world of bail. They think that a bondsman just raises his hand and you know, that's where it ends. With me, it starts with the people that you meet, the lawyers, the judges, the DAs, hearing about a bail, putting it together, which could take days, weeks, as in this case that we're talking about right now, Puffy. I started on this case going back almost 7 months ago when they brought me in as a consultant because
The crowd outside was electric, a mixture of outrage, vindication, and pure disbelief. But inside, something even more surreal was unfolding. Just moments, mere seconds after the word guilty was uttered, Diddy's legal team stood up and made a move that stunned everyone in the room. They demanded bail. Right there. Right then. No pause. No shame. No acknowledgement of the weight of the verdict that had just landed like a nuclear bomb in the center of the courtroom. It was audacious, shameless. But more than anything, it was desperate. Your Honor, one of Diddy's high-priced defense attorneys began, straightening his tie and pretending the room wasn't still reeling. We respectfully request that bail be granted pending sentencing. Mr. Combs is not a flight risk. He has extensive ties to this community, to this country.
Actually, you didn't tell me if it was unique. $50 million, right?
Yes.
You know, the idea of private security. It was an
Yes.
interesting argument because who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now, the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought it on our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, and we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to really be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that, was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And, I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. So, we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be, I know he wanted to go back to his property in Miami, Florida. And there's also an interesting question, I think, that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charges. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, but he would be a fool to try to violate any of those conditions when potentially he may get a rather lenient sentence compared
To his family, we believe he has every intention of complying with all future court appearances. The judge didn't blink. The prosecutor, though. She rose to her feet with a fire in her eyes that said she saw this coming from a mile away. Your Honor, she said, voice controlled but sharp as a blade. This man has manipulated systems, silenced victims, and operated with impunity for over 3 decades. He has private jets, offshore accounts, multiple passports, properties in jurisdictions with no extradition. He is not just a flight risk, he is a flight plan. And then she dropped the files. She had receipts, actual evidence, copies of bank transfers to foreign shell companies. jet logs from nights after certain allegations surfaced, security camera footage from back entrances of airports. This wasn't speculation. This was a paper trail laid out in front of the judge with surgical precision. The courtroom shifted
to what he was facing. So 2 questions there. Do you think that it would require him to be in New York as opposed to Florida? And do you think that he'd really be in a position to violate the conditions?
First question is, I can't determine what a judge is thinking. I don't think, and this is my opinion, that the judge would let him out of the jurisdiction. I don't know. We can do private security down in Miami. We could also do private security in California, as we did with Sam Bankman-Fried. I would probably think that if the judge would think about possibly a package, that he would want us to keep him here. When we first put the first package together, going a few months back, we did have an apartment here in the city that I did scout out and located a brownstone in New York that was sufficient enough, which we thought, which was 1 entrance in, 1 entrance out, for our security to be there, and no rooftop, couldn't get out from any of the windows. So we could always go back and see if that's still available. I don't know if it is or not. So I can't determine what a judge is going to think. I don't think he would let that happen if he decided to make bail, but you never know. This judge was very fair to both sides in the trial. And as far as would he want to screw up what he, after being, the convictions not coming through, I think he got to be dumb to do something like that.
Right.
He is going to possibly get his life back. I don't know what's going to happen in the music world. I don't know what's going to happen in his regular life, but he's not facing the time that he was facing before that.
And I'm going to talk about sentencing a little bit later on. The private security, right, that would monitor
Yes.
him 24/7. The argument could be, and this is something the prosecution's put forward, how can we trust that he's not just they're not bought and paid for, they're not really going to watch him if he's hiring them, there's a conflict of interest there. What's your response to that?
My team is ex-law enforcement, all gentlemen that have been involved either in the Marshal Service, FBI, police, even some CIA. So again, my people would not risk their lives on something, or risk their reputation, or even possibly a criminal charge on something like this. So my guys are vetted. They've been doing this a very long time. So they wouldn't jeopardize anything like that. Now, when we first talked about private security, Puffy wanted some of his people. We denied that right away. It's our guys. It's my reputation on the line here. And that's when I went to court, and Tony Rico and Mark Agnifilo both stood up and said, hey, Mr. Judelson is, his reputation's on the line here. He's been doing this a long time. I've bailed out Harvey Weinstein, Conor McGregor, Plaxico Burress, Cat Williams, Lawrence Taylor. So, I'm not going to put my reputation or my license in jeopardy, for X amount of money. To me, I'm going on. I might want to turn this business over to my son one day.
Yeah, the New York Times did a profile on you called Bailing Out the Stars. How are celebrities different? How are they different from other criminal defendants?
More demanding. When you get the phone call from the lawyer or whoever, a publicist, anybody, it could happen in the middle of the night. A celebrity does not want to spend an extra minute incarcerated. Things change so drastically with, when I did Conor McGregor, he surrendered. He wanted out right away. Plaxico Burress at that.
You could hear people inhale sharply. Diddy sat motionless, trying not to react. But his lawyers? They were sweating. Because this wasn't just a Hail Mary, it was a full-on gamble, and they were losing. The judge leaned back, steepled his fingers, and asked one simple question. Why now? And that's what silenced the defense. Why now? Why demand bail moments after being found guilty? Why not show an ounce of humility, a drop of remorse? Because they weren't trying to protect Diddy's dignity. They were trying to buy him time. Time to clean up. Time to move assets. Time to disappear. If not literally, then reputationally. It was clear. They were trying to control the narrative one last time. They argued that Diddy was a cultural icon. that he mentored young artists, that he donated to charities, that he had transformed lives. But the prosecution didn't let up. He transformed lives, she said, by destroying them first. She read victim statements aloud, one by one, from artists whose careers were crushed, assistants who were threatened, women who were paid to stay silent. Stories that painted a picture not of a music mogul, but of a predator with a PR machine. And then came the silence. The kind of silence that tells you everything is about to change. The judge picked up the motion. Read it. Looked up. Denied. Just like that. 2 syllables that dropped like a gavel to the throat. And Diddy?
Years behind bars in prison. But do you think even after this trial, after everything that we've learned, after the many civil lawsuits that were also filed, do you think that there's any type of way that Sean Combs can have a comeback at this point?
Well, I think there's certainly a comeback that could be crafted and created in which we as the public may see. Listen, this is a person who has lived his life in the public light, in the limelight for decades, okay? And so, as has been said before, fame is one of the more addictive or most addictive drugs known to man. And so he was a very famous, and now some might say infamous person. The idea that he allows the narrative to end with the way in which the evidence came in and this kind of mixed bag verdict does not is not what's the word I'm looking for? If I don't see Diddy allowing the last chapter of his book to be written with this trial, instead, the person that he's held himself out to be and who we now understand him to be is someone who is going to say, look, this was a dark chapter in my life, but now I'm going to show you the phoenix rising from the ashes. And there are other chapters. And I think that he will make an even more concerted effort to be more philanthropic, to be more of a victim's advocate. And also, once he completes these programs, he can say, look, I was once an abuser of women, abuser of drugs, abuser of fame, abuser of power and fortune, but look who I am now. And so I think that's a pretty powerful story. And frankly, people love comeback stories.
Yeah, they do love a good comeback story, but I'm curious, in your opinion, do you think that this is all just for maybe a showmanship, or do you think it's all for PR so that way, Diddy can walk out of MDC Brooklyn or possibly a potential prison and just be like, you know what, I am a changed person? But also in that same breath, what kind of message do you think that sends to victims out there who may have been abused or, something had happened to them by a high profile figure? They want to report this to police. They want to either go to maybe a civil lawyer, all of that stuff. But then after this trial, they are like, no, I can't do that. Look what happened in this case. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, there are definitely people who are victims advocates and victims themselves who think that this trial serves to kind of throw cold water, if you will, and chill victims who might want to come forward to express what happened to them, to initiate a criminal case, to initiate a civil case. They look at this case and say, at what cost is it to me personally to have to bare my soul, to only then be grilled on cross-examination, to have all of my intimate details bantied about, in the media, and then to be judged, and then go through all of that, and I walk away in some ways empty-handed. Now, that's certainly one way of looking at things, and there's a lot of credibility as it relates to understanding how someone could feel that way. The flip side, because remember, the scales adjust.
He didn't even blink at first. It was like his brain short-circuited. He stared at the judge, then at his lawyers, then back again, as if expecting someone to say it was a joke. But no one laughed. No one moved. Because it wasn't a joke. It was the end. The end of his freedom. The end of his power. The end of the illusion that he was untouchable. He slumped back in his chair, hands folded, jaw tight. The mogul, the icon, the empire builder? Gone. Now just a man in a suit that didn't mean anything anymore. And that's when the courtroom truly felt the shift. Because this wasn't just about one man. This was about every person who ever said, he'll never get caught. Every whisper that turned into silence. every NDA that buried the truth. This was about an entire industry built on silence, now forced to listen. Outside, the headlines were already live. Bail denied. Diddy in custody. Faces of stunned fans flooded social media. Celebrities issued PR-crafted statements. Some stayed silent. Others deleted posts. Sponsors cut ties. Streaming platforms began scrubbing his name from playlists. This wasn't just a fall. It was an implosion. His team tried to hold it together. They whispered. They gestured. But there was no plan B. Because once the court took him into custody, everything changed. Now every word, every call, every visitor, monitored. Now he's not just a convicted man. He's a detained one. He won't be going home tonight, or tomorrow, or maybe ever again. And that's what made the room so still. Not just that justice was served, but that power finally had a price. He sat there, surrounded by the very people who once bragged about being untouchable. Now they looked like ghosts. Lawyers with crumpled papers, PR handlers frozen in place. No one had answers, because they had all believed the myth that no matter how many allegations, how much evidence, how many victims, Diddy would always find a way out. But not this time. The prosecution made sure of that. And the judge? He sent a message. Not just to Diddy, but to every elite predator hiding behind fame. That the courtroom is where power goes to die. Bail denied. Game over.